Okay, well, the topic today is mind action. Or if you're not into that whole brevity thing, call it the law of mind action. And it's one of our 5 basic principles in Unity. That's something that the folks who are going to be at our new member orientation today are going to learn about. And the shorthand way of explaining it goes like this. The law of mind action means thoughts held in mind tend to produce after their own kind. And this is an idea that started becoming popular back in the mid-1800s. It was part of something that they were calling New Thought. You might have heard that term, New Thought. 150 years later, I think it's kind of hard to call it new, but we still hear the label New Thought, which brings up a question for me. What was it about this idea of mind action that seemed so new back in the 1800s, and what do we make of it today? First, a little background. Before New Thought came along, pretty much everyone, scientists, religious people, pretty much everyone believed that mind and matter were two totally separate things that operated according to 2 different and separate sets of rules. Whatever is made of matter can't think, and mind can't extend into the realm of matter. That's what people believed. And if you're into history and philosophy, a couple of names that you might be interested in. First of all, the philosophical name for that way of looking at reality is called substance dualism. And it originates with this guy up here. Historically, it originates with the French philosopher René Descartes. French philosopher, mathematician, and all-around smart guy back in the 1600s. And he put this out there, and people latched onto it. And it went along just fine for 150 or so years until a guy by the name of, get this name, Phineas Parkhurst Quimby. That's quite a mouthful. Phineas Parkhurst Quimby comes along. He proposes this, at the time, radical new idea that all of our physical illnesses originated in the mind. Now, of course, this was way before germ theory came along later on in the 1800s. Germ theory comes along and shows us that many illnesses are caused by these little microscopic critters that can attack the body, kind of like a hungry mosquito, viruses and bacteria. They're these individual living organisms that can make us ill regardless of what's going on in the mind, regardless of what we believe in. Nonetheless, Quimby opened the door to the possibility that mind and matter may not be 2 separate things, but instead might be perhaps 2 aspects of something else. 2 aspects of one thing. Call it infinite intelligence. Or another word we like to use is principle, with a capital P. Principle, the sum total of all the laws, theories, and principles that help us to explain how the universe works and how the universe is governed. And by the way, when you hear me use the word God up here, I'm not talking about a being or an entity with supernatural power who's external to our world. I'm talking about principle, with a capital P. Principle, or infinite intelligence. It's infinite in the sense that the human mind, at least as we now know it, is unable to fully comprehend it. But even though we may not be able to fully comprehend it, at least for now, it permeates every single particle of reality, tangible or intangible. So the human mind, human intelligence, it operates in accordance with principle. They overlap to a great degree. And that's a big deal. Or call it a big idea. A powerful way of thinking about the universe, and especially about our role in the universe, who we really are. So when our co-founders in Unity came along, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, they came up with this, they encountered this idea. And this is what Charles Fillmore had to say on the subject. He said, human, oh, I don't have that up there, that's all right. Humankind is the power of God in action. To humankind is given the highest power in the universe, the conscious power of thought. And he also said the thinking faculty in humankind makes each person a free agent because it is our creative center. In and through this one power, we establish our consciousness. We build our world. So, how does it feel to think of yourself as the power of God in action? That's what he's getting at. How does it feel to know that your thinking faculty sets you free? And it's the same thing in Buddhism. You find the same thing in Buddhism. The Buddha once said, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." That's from the Dhammapada. Okay, so that doesn't mean that everything we think turns into physical reality. And I know that there are still some folks, including unity teachers out there, who say that everything that happens to us and in the world around us is the result of the way we think. I would say the evidence rather overwhelmingly proves that this is simply not true. I had this slide up here just a minute ago. Anybody remember this thing? This Homeland Security Advisory System. A lovely color-coded chart, a system that told us how scared we were supposed to be on a daily basis. That's what it did. That's what it did. After the 9/11 attacks, they would roll this system out and they would run this chart on the news just about every single day, and they would let us know, oh, we got a high risk today, it's elevated. They wanted us to be scared. They wanted us to know how scared we were supposed to be. A national campaign to get everyone thinking about what? Terrorism. And yet, does that mean that we ended up manifesting more terrorism in this country? How about people, and Karen and I know someone like this, people who are obsessively afraid of tornadoes? That's a big deal in the Midwest. Or obsessively afraid of earthquakes, who live and die without ever experiencing a tornado or an earthquake. It doesn't work that way. Just because you think it, and even though you may be obsessed with it, doesn't mean you're going to produce it in your life or experience it as a physical thing. The principle is that thoughts held in mind tend to produce after their own kind, and the word tend is really, really important. Most of the time, we experience the results of our thoughts at the level of consciousness rather than an actual physical thing in the world. Fearful thoughts about tornadoes, earthquakes, terrorism will absolutely produce one thing for certain every single time. And you know what that is? Fear. It will produce fear. Living in a fear-based consciousness produces its own special kind of hell, doesn't it? That's what happens. At the level of consciousness, we were experiencing forms of attack, destruction, terrorism, terror. Hell isn't something in the afterlife. It's something we can live in right now if we choose. And it all starts at the level of thought, at the level of consciousness. There's a little gem from the Hindu scriptures, from the Bhagavad Gita, which says, "For him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy." The law of mind action. It means that the things that we allow to consistently occupy the mind, especially when they're supported by strong feelings, will tend to show up in our lives. And again, especially at the level of consciousness, first and foremost. And then from there, it can be just a short little jump to showing up in the body as sensations, emotions, or other physical symptoms. So, for example, if I go around habitually thinking about the world as a hostile and unfriendly place where it's dog eat dog, survival of the fittest, and the deck is stacked against me no matter what I do you think I might experience some things like a little anger or anxiety or things like that? What might that do to me at the gut level if I keep doing that day after day after day? It's going to be emotionally draining for sure. It would certainly have a negative impact on my relationships. I mean, who would want to be around somebody who's like that day in and day out? And yet I think we can probably all think of some folks who sort of carry that burden with them and inflict it on other people. Some cases, it can cause physical illnesses. Not every disease is caused by our thoughts, like Phineas Quimby claimed, but our thought process can have a profound effect on how our immune system functions and how our bodies respond to certain kinds of medications and things like that, on and on. Thoughts may not be physical things, and yet they can cause certain effects in the physical realm. That was a big discovery. That was new. That's why they called it New Thought at the time. And that's still an idea that works. Now here's the thing. With that kind of power, you would think that it would be really, really important that we would stay in control of our thoughts, right? Are we always in control of our thoughts? I know that I'm not. We can settle into some unconscious, habitual ways of thinking that may not be always for our highest and best. And one of the ways to break out of those kind of bad habits is by doing something that we talk about in Unity, and that's by using affirmations. And I got this great example. I think I've shared it with you before, but it's good to roll it out again. Something that I got from Reverend Paul Hasselbeck, who was one of our instructors back at Unity Institute. He also happens to have a program on Unity FM called Metaphysical Romp. Paul, great guy. Each week, he starts out his program by saying, "It's a beautiful day in my consciousness." It's very simple. It's a beautiful day in my consciousness. Sort of a riff on Mr. Rogers, I guess. Doesn't matter what's going on around us. It can always be a beautiful day in our consciousness. And it just starts by simply making that statement to help us make a little bit of a shift out of the habitual, conditioned ways of thinking. And this is an example of what Paul calls exercising our power of dominion or mastery over our thoughts. Our power of dominion or mastery over our thoughts. We use the power of our words to shift consciousness. Did your mama ever tell you to watch your language? Now, usually it was because you said one of those 7 words that you're not supposed to say on TV. But in reality, when your mama said watch your language, I don't think she was limiting that just to 4-letter words. If we're repeatedly experiencing anxiety, fear, anger, impatience, whatever negative thing you can think of, those kind of things, we first have to stop and remember that it isn't something in the outside world that's causing those feelings. Our own thoughts are ultimately the cause of those feelings. So that's when we need to remember to start watching our language, becoming aware of just exactly what stories we're telling ourselves, and then claiming the opposite with our current language. And we want to be especially vigilant of the kind of words that we use following 2 simple words. The 2 simple words are, I am. And we want to look very carefully at what we follow those 2 words with. There's a huge difference between saying, I feel sad, and I am sad. Big difference. There's nothing wrong with feeling sad. In fact, there's nothing wrong with feeling any of our feelings. It's perfectly appropriate in certain situations where we're feeling sad, tired, angry, disappointed, whatever it is. But when we say or think, I am sad, I am angry, we're embedding it in a way that is not for our highest and best. We're embedding it as the truth of our being, which is simply not true. So here's a simple denial and affirmation that might work in these kind of situations. We can say that I feel sad, but that is not the truth of my being. All feelings are transient, and my true nature, the nature that I claim, is joy. All right? This is just a way, again, of getting us to shift out of habitual ways of thinking into something that is perhaps a little more life-affirming and a little more truth-affirming. We claim the truth of our being. That's the important thing. Charles Fillmore explains it this way. He says that it is the law of spirit that we must be that which we would draw to us. If we would draw to us love, we must be love. Be loving and kind. If we would have peace and harmony in our environment outside, we must establish it within ourselves first. So, it's not just a matter of thinking something. It requires us to be immersed in it at the very level of our being. And when we decide to immerse ourselves in it, we're not drawing it to us, we are embodying it. And that is far more powerful than simply attraction. If we would draw to us love, we must be love, be loving, be kind. And we see this exemplified in the life and teachings of a lot of people that we admire. People like Jesus, Gandhi, Dr. King, who were beacons of love and peace, so much so that people still remember them and emulate them and pass on their teachings today. But even though they were these shining beacons embodying peace and love and nonviolence, what ended up happening to them? They met a violent end. It's a paradox. The law of mind action is not about manipulating reality. It is about living the truth. That's what it's about. We attract ourselves to people, situations, and things through the beliefs, the attitudes, and the thoughts that we hold, both conscious and unconscious. So it's not about controlling anything out there. It's about getting ourselves in alignment with that creative principle, with a capital P, that's at work in the universe, so that principle can work in us and through us and as us. And so in that way, we become the kind of thing that people want to emulate and remember and pass on to other people. So mind action, it's a powerful teaching, and I think it's still worth looking into. We call it New Thought, and I think it still is something that's new and exciting and worth studying. So work with it this week, and we'll see you next Sunday for something else. Thank you.